All right, so it's 11:45 a.m. You're sitting at work, sitting in the office, in your cube, getting ready to go to lunch, typing out your TPS reports, and the lights go out. Power goes out, goes dark. Maybe there's some windows. I've been in offices without windows. They're really awesome. Maybe you got some light coming in. You're like, oh man, power went out. It happens. It's happened to me at work before. You notice your computer's out, no surprise, power out, lights out. You pick up your phone's out too. Wonder what just happened, right? What just happened? My phone just stopped working. You're trying to text, get on social media and post, ha, power went out at work. But your phone's dead too, and everyone's just standing around looking at each other, what just happened. And expect that, right? There's going to be a lot of standing around looking at each other, trying to figure out what just happened for quite a while, right? So you go home, you figure, okay, power's out, boss calls it, hey, power's out, guys, can't write our TPS reports. I guess everybody go home, you get to the parking lot, you go to start your car, maybe your key fob doesn't work, you got to unlock the door. If people remember how to do that, your car doesn't work. Now you're standing in the parking lot looking at everybody else, no one else's cars will start, phones still aren't working, your watch maybe doesn't work. Not going to debate that. What do you do? What do you do at that point? So if you have a get home bag, you grab your get home bag. Maybe there's some water in the break room. Maybe you have a long walk. Maybe you have a short walk. It's time to get home at that point. And we've done some videos on it, and I'm not getting into what you should have in your get home bag right now. So you walk home, and as you realize your office building, your town was not the only one hit by an EMP. That's what I'm describing, EMP attack. Maybe you're home, maybe you're at work, maybe you're at the grocery store, power goes out. What do you do, right? How do you survive that EMP attack? And that's what we want to talk about, going in deep on what is an EMP, how to survive that EMP attack, right? So what is an EMP and what are current EMP capabilities? And I think that's important to talk about. So all this stuff I'm getting from is EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security 2021. So EMP attack, or HEMP, call it the ultimate cyber weapon, right? High altitude electromagnetic pulse. So any nuclear weapon detonated in outer space 30 kilometers or higher will generate a high altitude electromagnetic pulse. There's no blast, no thermal, no fallout or effects other than HEMP are experienced in the atmosphere and on the ground. A nuclear detonation at 30 kilometers altitude will generate an HEMP field with a radius of about 600 kilometers, damaging all kinds of electronics, blocking out electrical grids, and collapsing other life-sustaining critical infrastructure. Detonated at 400 kilometers altitude, the radius of the HEMP field will be about 2,200 kilometers, large enough to cover most of North America. So all it takes is one HEMP device to affect most of North America. I suspect our adversaries would probably use more than one, but that's academic at that point, right? 1, 2, 3, 5 doesn't really matter. So Russia has what they term super EMP weapons, nuclear warheads specialized for HEMP attack. Super EMP warheads have very low explosive yield, 10 kilotons or less, but very high gamma yield, which generates HEMP, according to Russian military and technical sources. Super EMP weapons can generate HEMP fields of 100,000 volts meter or higher, greatly exceeding the U.S. military hardening standard for HEMP, 50,000 volts meter. So they're big. They're big. Big weapons, right? And we don't actually have, from what I'm reading, we don't actually have a equivalent weapon. Doesn't really matter. Wouldn't matter to the people on the ground if we have 1 million of them, if ours are better than theirs. If one goes off, everything will change. Everything will stop immediately, right? So what to do first? So in my hypothetical scenario I started with, you're walking home probably. If you have a bug out location, maybe you're walking to that. If you're at the grocery store, if you're away from the house, you're walking, right? Odds are cars wouldn't work. So I'm not going to argue that. I know there's a lot of people on social media that want to argue all day about the possibilities, capabilities of EMP, HEMP, What will work, what won't work, will your flashlight work, will your night vision scope still work, what's going to work, what's not going to work. I'm not getting into that. It's super tedious, so let's talk about why I will say we don't know, right? We don't know what's actually capable. So the last EMP test that was done, the last real large EMP test that was done, was October 22nd, 1962. So 1962 was 62 years ago. So the last time there's been a serious EMP test was 62 years ago. Things like cell phones, night vision didn't exist 62 years ago. And it was probably a much smaller device than what they have now. So I'm going to say we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen if one of these large-scale EMP devices were to be detonated. And I'm not going to talk about the odds, right? We're proxy war, in war, will be in war with Russia, and it doesn't look like it's going to end, right? The government's trying to get funding to extend it for at least 3 years. It doesn't sound like anyone's going to surrender or yield. The longer that goes, the higher the risk of something like this happening. And I'm going to read you this. We'll talk a little bit about Faraday cages and why you may or may not want to use one. But let's talk about this. A high-yield warhead, 1 megaton or more, detonated for HEMP, over the ocean would cover an area of 2,200 kilometers in radius, a zone nearly as large as North America, with powerful E3 hemp that would penetrate the ocean depths and possibly damage or destroy the electronics of submarines on patrol. So if a submarine underwater isn't going to be protected from an HEMP, these new modern super EMP weapons, I suspect the stuff you chuck in the microwave for protection probably won't make it either. I'm not going to argue that. You do you, whatever you want to do on that. So what do you do first? You're at home, you get home, you're walking home, you're going to want to gather water. I would say water should be your first priority, and I've got a little example back here. So this is 5 pounds of pinto beans in a Mylar bag. You could argue that 5 pounds of pinto beans works out to about a 5-day food supply. Buy it, stack it, store it, stack it to the roof, whatever you feel like you need to do, 5 days worth of food. This is 5 gallons of water. You can see there's a big difference here, right, between 5 gallons of water and 5 pounds of food. 5 days worth of food, 5 days worth of water. That takes up a lot of space. It's actually heavy. Takes up a lot of space. So it's unlikely that most people, especially if you're not into prepping, you have enough water for any real period of time. If you look at the rule of threes, 3 days without water, you're going to start having issues. And we'll get into that. A lot of people would start having issues very quickly in an EMP situation. It's hard to stack and store a lot of water, right? So what do you do? Gather water, right? If you have a water bob or a bathtub bag, you can fill that up right away. Most people's water supply to their houses requires some kind of electronical pumping system. Where we're at, there's water towers, water's pumped into the tower, gravity feeds it to the house, but a lot of water supplies, a lot of people's houses requires electricity, right? Even if you have a well, good for you, you still need an electrical pump, and I've talked to preppers and seen preppers that are prepared for that, and good for them. Most people are not, right? First thing you're going to notice is lack of water and getting real thirsty, right? So you do first, you get home first, start gathering water, start getting ready, get your preps ready. This is the slow apocalypse, and EMP would be the slow apocalypse. We've all been through a pandemic recently, and there was a lot of sitting around, right? A lot of the dude in his bathrobe. Get ready for a long, slow apocalypse, right? When does the chaos start? So that's a good question, right? And there's a lot of prepper fiction and people that say 72 hours. Within 72 hours of an EMP attack, of the grid going down, you got 72 hours and the chaos would start. So people are going to stand around for 3 days and be, hey, I wonder what happened. Well, if you look at Venezuela in modern times, there was a grid down. Chaos started in hours, not 72 hours. Once again, no point in arguing the point. We don't know till it happens, but I suspect chaos quickly. Hours, not days, hours. If you get 72 hours, great. I think the idea is you've got 72 hours to maybe go to the grocery store, top up your preps, drive to your bug out location. If your car works, grocery store is not going to work. And I've talked to a few preppers on this. I mentioned this before. Hopefully kind of, helped with their thinking there a little bit. If your plan is, hey, there's a grid down, I'm going to go to the grocery store. I'm going to get a bunch of canning jars. I'm going to get a bunch of canned goods. I'm going to raid the pharmacy. That's looting, because the moment the power's out, the grocery stores are going to close, right? Who's going to stay in there? Lights are out, POS system, point of sale system doesn't work. They're going to close the doors, right? And very quickly, looters are going to descend on that. It's going to be chaos, right? And if your plan is day one looting, I get it, right? If you're not prepared, you're not prepared. You're going to do what you have to do. Very quickly, everyone's going to be doing what they have to do to survive. So I would say the world will stop, and very quickly the purge. The purge will start. If you've seen the Purge movies, I suspect in the beginning it's probably going to look a lot like that. America will look a lot like the Purge. All the people are still there, unlike, say, a nuclear attack where entire cities are going to be wiped out, or a pandemic. Everybody gets sick and dies, unfortunately. EMP, everyone's going to be still there. People are going to be sitting in their cities, in their penthouses, in their wherever, suburbia, and all of a sudden nothing works, and all the stores are gone, and all the gas stations are gone, and hospitals aren't working, and the police cars aren't driving around more than likely, and the courts are shut down, the prisons are shut down, and you're just sitting there in your house. What are you going to do, right? What's going to happen? When does that purge start? Well, 3 days, 72 hours is when you start getting thirsty, and people have water, right? People are going to have water. Some people aren't going to have water. Very quickly, people are going to get thirsty. They're going to go looking for water. They're going to go looking for food. They're going to go looking for things they need to survive. As I said, you look at Venezuela, that was localized. Chaos was almost immediate, right? People realize there's no cops, there's no cell phones, no airplanes, no public transportations, no pharmacies, no banks, no ATMs. I'll say no hospitals in Venezuela. That was not an EMP attack. There was a grid down. The hospitals were still trying to run on backup generators. Probably wouldn't work in an EMP. I'm not going to debate that. There could be some chance of medical care, but in Venezuela, people were looting the hospitals, right? So very quickly, things will start to fall apart. So short-term versus long-term, weeks and months versus years, slow apocalypse. I would suspect the very best plan in the beginning, the first couple days, weeks, and months after an EMP attack, after a major shutdown of everything, is hide. Keep a low profile. Don't look like a target, because once again, people are going to start wandering around once the grocery stores in the big cities are empty and the cars don't work and the subway doesn't work. Bicycles would still work, your shoes still work. People are going to start expanding out from the big cities looking for food, because when people get hungry, they want to find food, looking for water supplies, water sources. And that's going to be this great migration of people going out of the big city into suburbia, into small towns, into the country, looking for food. That's going to get very ugly, I doubt. Civilization, right, what we expect in modern civilization, how people behave and act, would continue, right? So expect a breakdown of everything. So hide in the beginning. We've talked about that. If you have a solar backup system, will it work? I don't know. I'm not going to argue that. Once again, we said EMP weapons can take out submarines underwater. Is your Faraday cage going to work? I don't know, right? I don't know on that. If you have solar, if you have backup, if you have some way to cook your food indoor quietly, great. If you have canned goods, stick with the canned goods. I wouldn't be making campfires. I wouldn't be trying to cook food on fires. Campfires draw attention. There's going to be a lot of people wandering around for their first weeks and months, just looking for food, looking to survive, perhaps getting very violent. And you think about the zombie apocalypse movies where they're trying to find people to eat. Well, they're just going to be trying to find food to eat. So first couple weeks and months, probably very ugly, right? Very ugly, slow apocalypse, hide in the beginning. So eventually, the population will decrease. That's just reality. Unfortunately, they say 90% of people would not survive the first year without power. So at some point, you can go from hiding, sitting in the dark, eating your canned goods, hoping they don't pick, you don't have 1,000 people trying to break into your house to steal your food. Eventually, you're going to have to start farming. You're going to have to start growing food. Someday you run out of your pinto beans, and then you got your seeds, right? You're going to have to hit your seeds. I've done some videos on the math. It takes a lot of seeds, a lot of plants to grow enough food to survive on. Odds are, no matter how many seeds you have, Hopefully you got the heirloom seeds. You can start seed saving and growing. Gardening takes time, not just to grow food, but to learn how to grow food. So maybe you're starting now. Hopefully you've got the idea down now. You've got your seeds, your seed saving. You know, one tomato is full of seeds. It can get you more plants than one, right? So it's exponential growth in the size of your garden. But at some point, someday, if you survive, you're going to run out of pinto beans. You're going to start farming. Hopefully you've got enough food to get through that first harvest or two. Right? Eventually start farming. Same thing with water, right? Takes up a lot of space. It's heavy. You can't store enough water to last you the rest of your life. So you look at something like a water filter. Now, I've talked to some people online about this. Sawyer says 100,000 gallons of water. So that's sort of a long-term prep. If you drink a gallon a day, which is more or less the recommended, that's still 100,000 days. That's a lot of years. That's hundreds of years of water. So something like this, maybe more than one, is actually a long-term prep. You're going to need to continue to find water. You're going to run out of your stored water no matter what. At some point, you're going to need to find water. You're going to need to filter water. This is not a bad option, right? Certainly learn how to make filters without something like that. There's, you know, things like gravel and sand and activated charcoal. There's all different filters you can make, but at some point you're going to have to find water, because all the water that's available people are going to drink as they're kind of out searching. So what to do now? Before, we said Faraday cages, advantage of protecting prep short term. So we'll assume, for argument's sake, Faraday cages will work. Throw it in the microwave, it'll work. Maybe something like a night vision scope, you've got that. It would give you a tactical advantage in the beginning, right? Whether you have comms, maybe some walkie-talkies so you can talk to your group. Hopefully you have a group and you get together and you form a community. Certainly some kind of an agricultural-based farming community is likely a good idea. Neighborhood watch. Maybe those will work. It would give you that advantage, certainly, right? Being able to talk when other people can't. Night vision so you can see at night while other people can't. Anything like that is not a bad idea. Certainly could help out in the beginning, assuming the Faraday cage worked. As I said, submarines, underwater, getting taken out, to me, feels like that's very Faraday cage-ish, and if that's going to go down, that's, I don't know. Right, ultimately, whether you have stuff prepped in Faraday cages and you don't, whether they work or not, the only real prep for something like an EMP or just a general grid down is get prepared to live without power, right? And at this point, you're probably thinking, if you stuck with the video, I don't care. I wouldn't want to survive. And I mentioned this before. 1973, a group of rugby players crashed in the Andes Mountains, right? Horrible story, heroism, bravery, survival. I'm not putting the story down, certainly not putting the people down that were in that situation and did what they had to survive. But I suspect if you asked them 2 weeks before they got on the plane that crashed how they felt about going cannibal to survive, I suspect every single one of them would say, no, I'm not going to do that. I wouldn't want to survive. Yet in that situation, it's hard to blame them for just trying to live. So if you're thinking at this point, I wouldn't want to survive, okay, right, neither probably would they have if you had asked them, and then next thing you know, they're crashed on a mountain in the snow, and they did what they had to do to survive, right? Is that a situation where they should have been more prepared? I don't think you can be prepared for that. You can't expect that. But what are things you can do now, right? We said water storage. Certainly water storage is good. It has natural physical limitations based on size and weight. Having some basic preps like a water filter, one of those straws you can drink through is not a bad idea. Food storage, long-term food storage, not a bad idea. You can always eat it before it expires, right? Buy what you eat. Eat what you buy, rotate, look at long-term food storage, whether you like MREs, rice or beans, whatever it is, whatever you have space for. I've done plenty of videos on that. Probably not a bad idea. And then other preps, right? Seeds, you need more than seeds if you're going to garden. You have gardening tools, shovels, experience. Is your soil any good, right? It's not enough to say, I got a pack of seeds, I'll be good, I'll figure out how to garden when I'm starving to death. It doesn't really work like that. Other power outage preps are probably nice to have. Candles, candle wicks, the ability to make candles. Once again, an EMP, life after an EMP would go on for a very long period of time. So could you recharge rechargeable batteries to keep your flashlights going? Maybe, sure. At some point, you got to learn how to make candles. Are you making candle wicks? Are you processing fat from livestock to make the candles? Maybe, right? And you can look at those skills. You can think about this stuff ahead of time. You don't have to get sad and depressed and say, this is horrible. It certainly would be. But being prepared, this is a thought exercise. Growing food, storing food. Do you know how to store food long time? Root cellar. Canning, salt for food preservation. You can store salt, accumulate salt for food preservation. Any kind of first aid, medical. First aid training is probably worth more than stacks of gauze and bandages, but certainly having first aid supplies could make a difference early on. All right, so what about medicinal herbs? Certainly learning medicinal herbs. We've shown books on medicinal herbs. Anything like that would be good to have. What about foreign aid, right? Say, okay, great. Grid's going to go down, EMP hits, but people are going to come in and rush in and help us. It wouldn't be that bad. It wouldn't last that long. And that really depends on what happens day zero. If there was an EMP attack on the United States, would we retaliate? Would other places get attacked? Would we ultimately result in sort of a world down situation due to retaliations and attacks and counterattacks? Would it lead into nuclear war? All that's possible, right? We don't really know. Hard to war game out just one scenario that would be the scenario. Maybe there's foreign aid at some point. Maybe the other countries come in, right? We don't know on that, but I suspect, the real answer is think about being prepared, right? And the one thing about being prepared, prepping, is that stuff like extra food, extra water, maybe self-defense, prepares you for almost any scenario, right? You don't have to pick one scenario. There was that show, Doomsday Preppers, back in the day, and they're like, hey, I'm preparing for a solar flare, or I'm preparing for the polar shift, and whatever it is. You don't. I mean, there's basic emergency preparedness, and that covers most things, whether it's a tornado, whether it's a flood, whether it's a local power outage, whatever it is, stuff like food, water filters, some basic things are going to be generally good to have. So not telling you this to scare you, right? I think it's a thought exercise. Think about what might happen. Think about how you would be prepared for that. Once it happens, it's sort of too late to prepare, right? So I hope that helps out. As always, thank you for watching, and we appreciate you.